The champagne flute felt dangerously fragile in my hand, a slender stem of potential catastrophe. I focused on that, on the cool, smooth glass beneath my fingertips, because if I focused on anything else I might just shatter it myself. The party was a symphony of wealth and whispered connections, a world Leo had slowly, painstakingly introduced me to over the last 18 months. And I, a fool in a deceptively simple but devastatingly elegant black dress, had thought I finally belonged. I thought I was his. We'd arrived together, his hand a familiar warm weight on the small of my back. He'd leaned in, his breath a whisper against my ear, "You look stunning. They won't know what hit them." I'd preened, a bird in a gilded cage, believing every word. For an hour it was perfect. We moved through the glittering crowd, a unit. He'd get me a drink, our fingers brushing. I'd make a witty observation about the modern art on the walls, and he'd look at me with that proud, possessive gleam in his eyes that I had come to crave. It was the look that said, "Wine." Then we'd been cornered by a group of his colleagues from the venture capital firm. Older men with sharp eyes and shark-like smiles, their wives a collection of quiet, polished gems. This was it. The inner circle. Leo had been angling for a partnership, and this was a crucial test. "Leo, my boy," boasted a man named Charles, his grip firm on a crystal tumbler of amber liquid. "Heard you closed the Ethelred deal. Nasty bit of business, but you pulled it off. This must be the secret weapon you've been hiding." He gestured to me with his glass. I smiled, ready. This was my moment. I'd helped Leo brainstorm his initial approach for that deal. I'd been the one to point out a flaw in the competitor's structure he'd overlooked. I was more than a secret weapon, I was his partner. Leo's laugh was a little too loud, a little too forced. He slid his arm around my shoulders, but the gesture felt different now. Dismissive. Patronizing. "Charles, this is my friend," Leo said, and the world didn't just stop, it inverted. "Ilara. Friend." The word hung in the air, a cheap, tawdry little thing that sucked all the oxygen out of the room. It was a deliberate choice. Not girlfriend, a term he'd used 1,000 times in private. Not partner, which I'd dared to hope for. Not even "this is Ilara," which would have been neutral, ambiguous. No. He had specifically, consciously chosen to label me as his friend. I felt the smile freeze on my face, a brittle mask. My cheeks burned with a humiliation so profound it felt like a physical blow. I saw the subtle shift in the eyes of the people around us. The assessing gazes of the women softened into pity. The men's looks lost their respectful curiosity and became appreciative in a different, more superficial way. The friend. The pretty, temporary accessory. "Ah," Charles said, his interest visibly waning. "Lovely to meet you, Ilara." The conversation moved on, a river flowing around a newly formed rock. Me. I was no longer part of the current. I stood there, smiling my frozen smile, nodding at appropriate intervals, but I was a ghost. A beautifully dressed, utterly invisible ghost. For the rest of the evening I was polite. I was charming. I was a perfect hollow doll. Leo, sensing my frost but misreading its cause entirely, tried to placate me with whispered apologies about office politics and not wanting to seem unprofessional by mixing business with pleasure. Pleasure. Is that what I was? A pleasant diversion? When he dropped me off at my apartment building, he tried to kiss me. I turned my head, letting his lips brush my cheek. "Ilara, come on," he sighed, exasperated. "It was just a party. It doesn't mean anything. You're being dramatic." "Good night, Leo," I said, my voice eerily calm. I walked into my apartment, closed the door and leaned against it, the silence screaming in my ears. I didn't cry. The hurt was too deep for tears. It was a tectonic shift, a fundamental rewriting of my reality. For 18 months I had built my life around this man. I had supported his dreams, soothed his ego, celebrated his victories as if they were my own. I had loved him with a quiet, steady ferocity that I thought was reciprocated. And with one word he had reduced it all to nothing. Friend. I walked to my balcony, the city lights sprawling before me like a field of fallen stars. The chill night air was a balm on my heated skin. The humiliation began to curdle, transforming in the crucible of my quiet fury into something else entirely. Something cold. Something sharp. He didn't see me as an equal. He saw me as an ornament. A friend he could sleep with until someone more suitable, more professional came along. Fine. If that's who he thought I was, then he didn't know me at all. The woman he'd introduced as his friend was a carefully constructed facade, the version of me he found most pleasing. But I was so much more. A plan began to form in my mind, not as a sudden dramatic epiphany, but as a slow, inexorable tide. It was audacious. It was terrifying. It was perhaps a little unhinged. But it was perfect. Leo valued power, success, status above all else. He lived in a world of rivals and acquisitions. So I wouldn't cry. I wouldn't scream. I wouldn't even confront him. I would become his biggest rival. And then I would become his rival's wife. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the balcony door. My eyes, once soft with love, were now hard with purpose. Okay, Leo, I whispered to the sleeping city. You introduced me as your friend. Let's see how you introduce me when I'm the one standing across the negotiating table. When I'm the one your boss fears. When I'm the one wearing another man's ring. The game was on. The morning after the party, I woke up not with a hangover, but with a clarity so sharp it was almost painful. The world had not ended. It had simply been stripped of its illusions. The cozy future I'd painted with Leo, the shared home, the dog, the lazy Sundays, was revealed as a fresco on a rotten wall. It was time to tear it down and build something new from the rubble. My first act was to call Leo. He answered on the second ring, his voice laced with a cautious, conciliatory tone. Elara. Hey. Look about last night. It's fine, Leo, I interrupted, my voice smooth as polished stone. I overreacted. You were right. It was a professional setting. I understand. The silence on the other end was thick with surprise. He'd been braced for a fight, for tears, for the drama he so despised. This calm acceptance was not in his script. Oh. I'm glad you see it that way. So, dinner tonight? I can book that Italian place you like. I can't, I said, already opening my laptop. I've got a lot on with work. And actually, my schedule is looking pretty packed for the foreseeable future. I think we should take a step back. A step back? He echoed, confusion turning to a flicker of alarm. What does that mean? It means I need to focus on my career right now, Leo. We've both been so busy it feels like we've been drifting. Maybe a little space is what we need. I layered my voice with a convincing hint of sad resignation. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation, and I was a quick study. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. This was better in a way than me being angry. An amicable, slightly melancholy break was something he could handle. It didn't threaten his ego. It was convenient. If that's what you need, he said, his voice softening with relief. I'll give you your space. But we'll talk soon, right? Of course, I lied sweetly. Take care, Leo. I hung up before he could say another word. The cord was cut. Now for the blueprint. My career, the one I had supposedly neglected, was in architectural design. I was good. Damn good. But I'd been working for a small boutique firm, taking on safe, aesthetically pleasing residential projects. It was comfortable. It was never going to make me a rival to a venture capital titan like Leo. I needed a new battlefield. And I knew just where to find it. 4 months, Leo had talked of nothing but the Viridian Tower project. It was the crown jewel his firm was pursuing. A monumental mixed-use skyscraper that would redefine the city's skyline. The architectural contract alone was worth tens of millions. The lead architect would become a legend. The firm spearheading the design bid was Kalis Designs, helmed by the notoriously brilliant and reclusive Alexander Kalis. Leo's firm, Apex Ventures, was the primary financial backer. The two men were locked in a complex, often tense dance. Leo saw Kalis as a volatile genius who needed to be managed. From the little I'd gleaned, Kalis saw Leo as a soulless suit trying to put a price tag on artistry. They were rivals. And Alexander Kalis was my target. Getting a job at Kalis Designs was a near-impossible feat. He didn't hire through normal channels. He poached talent or discovered it in obscure corners of the world. He valued innovation and a ruthless dedication to the craft above all else. I spent the next week in a frenzy. I pulled all-nighters, not for Leo but for myself. I revisited my old university portfolio, the one filled with wild, unbuildable concepts my previous employers had dismissed as too ambitious. I sketched new ideas, feverish designs that challenged conventional forms and materials. I focused on concepts for vertical, sustainable urban spaces. The very philosophy I knew was at the core of the Viridian Tower project. I wasn't just applying for a job, I was crafting a weapon. I found a non-public general email for the Kalis Designs Administrative Office. I didn't send a resume. I sent a single PDF. It contained 3 of my most radical architectural concepts, rendered in stunning detail. No cover letter. No pleading. Just the work. The subject line was, "The Future of Vertical Living." I hit send and then forced myself to breathe. The die was cast. The waiting was agony. I filled the days by methodically dismantling the life I'd shared with Leo. I boxed up the sweater he'd left at my place, the books, the stupid funny mug he liked to drink his coffee from. I deleted his photos from my social media, untagging myself with a cold, clinical efficiency. I was excising a tumor. 3 days later my phone rang. The number was unknown. Alara Vance, a crisp female voice inquired. Speaking. This is Anya, personal assistant to Alexander Kalis. Mr. Kalis was intrigued by your portfolio. He would like to see you tomorrow at 8 a.m. His office. My heart hammered against my ribs. Tomorrow. Him. I'll be there. The Kalis Designs office was nothing like the sterile glass and chrome fortress of Apex Ventures. It was housed in a converted industrial loft, a vast open space buzzing with a chaotic creative energy. Raw brick walls were covered in massive schematics and whiteboards scrawled with complex equations. Models of breathtaking structures sat on every available surface. It was a cathedral of ambition. Anya, a severe-looking woman with a sharp black bob, led me to a corner office that was more workshop than executive suite. And there, standing before a massive half-finished model of a twisting crystalline tower, was Alexander Kalis. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe mid-30s. He wasn't classically handsome. His features were too sharp, his dark hair a little too long and unruly. He wore a simple black t-shirt and jeans, smudged with what looked like clay or plaster. But his presence was magnetic. He had the focused, intense energy of a storm contained in a human form. He didn't turn around as I entered. "The structural integrity of your Ares concept," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that seemed to vibrate in the very air. "The central spine. It's impossible with current materials." It wasn't a question. It was a challenge. Yes. I swallowed my nerves. "It's not impossible. It's premature. The composite I specified is in development at MIT. It will be viable within 18 months. Good architecture shouldn't just accommodate the future. It should demand it." He turned then and his eyes pinned me to the spot. They were a startling, pale gray like chips of winter sky, and they saw everything. "You sent me 3 concepts. Why those 3? He asked, ignoring my answer entirely. "Because they're a thesis," I said, my voice growing stronger. "Ares is about air and light. The Terra concept is about integrated biospheres. The Strata is about redefining communal space in a vertical axis. Together they represent the 3 core challenges and opportunities of the Viridian Tower. The project you're working on right now." A slow, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a predator spotting worthy prey. "You're the one dating Leo Mercer from Apex." The statement was a gut punch. I hadn't anticipated this. How did he know? I forced myself not to look away. I corrected, my tone leaving no room for doubt. "We are no longer involved." Why? This was it. The moment of truth. I could lie, fabricate a story. Or I could wield the truth like the weapon it was. "He introduced me as his friend at a party," I said, meeting his piercing gaze without flinching. "I decided I'd rather be his biggest rival." The silence in the room was absolute. Alexander Kalis stared at me, his head tilted, those gray eyes dissecting my soul. Then he let out a short, sharp bark of laughter that seemed to surprise even him. "Anya," he called out, not taking his eyes off me. She appeared at the door. "Yes, Alex. Clear a space for Ms. Vance. She starts today." He turned back to the model on his desk. "And get Leo Mercer on the phone. I need to discuss the load-bearing calculations for the penthouse. I've decided to change them." He glanced back at me, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes other than cold assessment. It looked like respect. And a shared, predatory anticipation. Welcome to the war, Ilara Vance. The first month at Kalis Designs was a trial by fire that made Dante's Inferno look like a spa weekend. Alexander, he insisted everyone call him Alex, a rule that felt less like camaraderie and more like a tactical dismissal of hierarchy, was a merciless taskmaster. He didn't give instructions, he issued challenges that bordered on the impossible. My official title was Junior Design Associate, a laughable misnomer. I was thrown directly into the deep end of the Viridian Tower project, tasked with the habitation modules, the innovative, sustainable apartment units that were meant to be the tower's beating heart. It was a critical component, one that Apex Ventures and specifically Leo were watching like hawks, concerned about profitability and market appeal. Alex's initial directive was simple: make them forget they're living in a box in the sky. I don't want apartments. I want ecosystems. I lived and breathed the project. I arrived before the sun and left long after it had set. The loft became my second home, the scent of coffee, fresh-cut paper and 3D printer resin a permanent fixture in my nostrils. My colleagues were a collection of brilliant, eccentric and fiercely competitive individuals who viewed the new girl with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. I was the one Alex had plucked from obscurity. I had something to prove not just to him but to all of them, and to myself. Late one evening, about 3 weeks in, I was alone in the loft, surrounded by a miniature city of failed models. My concept, which used a series of interlocking rotating panels to maximize natural light and create adaptable living spaces, was hitting a wall. The mechanics were too complex, the cost prohibitive. Leo would have a field day tearing it apart in the next joint review meeting. Frustration was a bitter taste in my mouth. I was about to sweep the entire mess into the trash when a voice spoke from the shadows. "You're thinking like an architect." I jumped, my heart leaping into my throat. Alex was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching me. He moved with a silent, predatory grace that was unnerving. "Isn't that the point?" I asked, my voice tight with exhaustion. "No. You're thinking about space. Form. Function. All the wrong things." He walked over, picked up one of my models and turned it over in his hands as if it were a dead insect. "You're trying to build a better box. Kalis Designs doesn't build boxes." "Then what should I be thinking about?" I challenged, too tired for diplomacy. "People," he said, his gray eyes locking onto mine. "Not residents. Not the market. People. What do they feel when they wake up? What do they need to forget the world below? What kind of light makes a bad memory bearable? What kind of space makes a lonely person feel held?" He dropped the model back onto the table with a dismissive clatter. "Stop designing apartments. Design an experience. Design a feeling." It was the most he'd ever said to me at once, and it was like a key turning in a lock I didn't know existed. He wasn't just a brilliant designer, he was a philosopher of space. He understood the soul of a building in a way I'd only ever glimpsed. He left as silently as he'd arrived, leaving me alone with my shattered models and a radically new perspective. I went back to the drawing board, but this time I started with a question. What would make someone feel truly, profoundly home 1,000 feet in the air? I thought of my own balcony, the feeling of being connected to the vast, breathing city. I thought of the need for privacy versus the need for community. I thought of the healing power of nature in a sterile urban environment. I scrapped the rotating panels. Instead, I designed a system of deep, multi-level terraces, not as add-ons, but as integral parts of the living space. I incorporated vertical gardens that residents could tend, creating a living, growing wall between them and their neighbors, offering both separation and a shared, green purpose. I designed the interior layouts around central heart spaces, with floor-to-ceiling windows and built-in nooks that felt like embraces, not rooms. It was risky. It was organic. It was the antithesis of the sleek, minimalist and easily marketable units Leo would be expecting. The day of the first major review meeting with Apex Ventures arrived. I dressed with deliberate care, a sharp, tailored navy trouser suit, my hair pulled back in a severe knot. I looked like power. I felt like vengeance. Walking into the conference room at Apex was like stepping onto a battlefield. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and unspoken competition. And there, at the head of the table, was Leo. He did a double take when I walked in behind Alex. His eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated shock. He looked from me to Alex and back again, his brain visibly short-circuiting. "Ilara?" What are you? He stammered, his professional polish cracking. Leo, Alex said, his voice a lazy drawl that contained a world of menace. I see you've met my new lead designer for the residential modules. Alara, shall we begin? The satisfaction of seeing the color drain from Leo's face was a drug more potent than any I'd ever known. He was flustered, off balance. This was not the dramatic ex-girlfriend he'd dismissed. This was a professional adversary standing shoulder to shoulder with his most difficult partner. The meeting began. Leo's team presented their market analyses, their profit projections, their safe, boring suggestions for standardized unit layouts. When it was my turn, I stood my back straight and clicked to the first slide. For 20 minutes, I presented my concept. I didn't just talk about square footage and material costs. I talked about psychological well-being, about creating a vertical village, about the poetry of light and shadow. I spoke with a passion and authority I didn't know I possessed. I was no longer Leo's quiet friend. I was a visionary. When I finished, there was a stunned silence in the room. Leo was staring at me as if he'd never seen me before. There was confusion, yes, and anger, but beneath it all, a flicker of something that looked like dawning, horrified respect. One of Leo's senior partners, a woman named Brenda, leaned forward, her eyes alight. This is exceptional, Ms. Vance. Truly groundbreaking. The marketing potential alone. Leo found his voice. It's a massive financial risk, he interjected, his tone sharp. The construction costs for these terraces and living walls are astronomical. We're building for a market, not for a architectural digest spread. It was the opening salvo. The old Leo dismissing my ideas as frivolous. But before I could retort, Alex spoke. He hadn't taken his eyes off Leo the entire time. Cost is my concern, Leo, not yours. Your concern is funding vision. And this, he said, gesturing to my designs on the screen, is the only thing that will make the Viridian Tower worth building. Otherwise, it's just another glass penis reaching for the sky. We have enough of those. The room went dead quiet. Leo looked like he'd been slapped. He was being publicly neutered by his rival in front of his own team, and with his ex-girlfriend as the weapon. The meeting ended shortly after, with Apex agreeing to review the financials of my proposal. As we packed up, Leo cornered me by the door. Alara, what is this? He hissed, his voice low and furious. Is this some kind of pathetic revenge scheme? Getting a job with him? I turned to him, my expression one of cool, professional detachment. It's a career move, Leo. You of all people should understand that. I suggest you take my designs seriously. They're going to make your firm a fortune. Or, I added, letting a sliver of ice into my voice, your biggest competitor will. I walked away, leaving him standing there, seething. I didn't look back. As I stepped into the elevator with Alex, I felt his gaze on me. You eviscerated him, he remarked, a note of approval in his voice. No, I said, staring at my reflection in the polished elevator doors. A confident, powerful woman stared back. That was just the opening move. The war was underway and I had just won the first battle. But the campaign for my own soul, and the unexpected, complicated alliance with the man beside me, was only just beginning. Weeks bled into months, and the Viridian Tower project became the center of my universe. My design for the habitation modules, after a brutal but successful negotiation round where I held my ground against Leo's every attempt to dilute it, was officially approved. The victory was sweet, but it was only the beginning. Now came the real work, making the dream buildable. This meant long, intense hours working directly with Alex. Our initial dynamic, the volatile genius and his vengeful protégé, began to shift into something else, something I couldn't easily label. We were partners in a siege, two generals plotting against the common enemy of mediocrity, budget constraints, and Leo's persistent bean-counting interference. We'd often be the last two left in the loft, the city lights glittering beyond the vast windows like a spilled treasure chest. The air would be thick with the scent of marker pens and the quiet hum of computers. We'd argue over structural supports, debate the emotional impact of different lighting schemes, and deconstruct supplier contracts until our voices were hoarse. It was during these late nights that I began to see the man behind the myth. The Alexander Kalis the world saw was a brusque, arrogant savant. The man I was getting to know was fiercely, almost painfully passionate. He saw buildings not as structures but as living entities with bones, skin, and a soul. He could be ruthlessly critical, but his criticism was never personal. It was a relentless pursuit of perfection. If your idea could withstand his scrutiny, it was bulletproof. One night, we were battling a particularly stubborn issue with the wind shear on the upper levels, the calculations refusing to align. Models were scattered across the central table, printouts of failed equations littering the floor like fallen leaves. I was running on caffeine and sheer stubbornness, my eyes gritty with fatigue. "It's the tapering," Alex muttered, raking a hand through his already disheveled hair. "We're thinking about it wrong. It's not a gradual narrowing, it needs to be a series of releases. Like a spine uncoiling." He grabbed a fresh sheet of tracing paper and began to sketch, his movements swift and sure. I watched, mesmerized, as a new organic form emerged from the chaos of his lines. It was brilliant. It was also completely unorthodox and would send Apex's engineers into a panic. "Leo will never go for it," I said, voicing the inevitable obstacle. Alex didn't look up from his sketch. "Leo's opinion is the least of my concerns. The building needs this. It's the right thing to do." "The right thing," I repeated softly. "You always talk about the building's needs like it's a person." He finally glanced up, his gray eyes catching the light. "Isn't it? We give it a form, a purpose. It will outlive us. It will house memories, births, deaths, love, despair. It has a responsibility to its inhabitants. We have a responsibility to it." He held my gaze. "You understand that? It's why your modules work. You weren't just designing space. You were designing a backdrop for lives." His words struck a deep, resonant chord within me. It was the first time anyone had ever articulated the nebulous feeling that drove me to design. Leo had always seen my work as a hobby, a cute, side project. Alex saw it as a calling. In that moment, the last of my professional armor cracked. The revenge plot that had fueled my initial fire began to feel small and petty next to this shared burning purpose. "We're a good team," I said, the admission surprising us both. A slow, genuine smile touched his lips, transforming his sharp features. It wasn't the predatory grin I'd seen before. It was warmer, more real. "We're a devastating team, Vance. They don't stand a chance." The following week, we had to present the new, uncoiling spine design to Apex. It was a bloodbath. Leo, backed by his team of engineers, tore into it. He called it structurally dubious, a nightmare for HVAC, and a marketing disaster. "It looks like it's about to topple over." Leo snapped, jabbing a finger at the rendering. I stood to respond, but Alex placed a subtle hand on my arm, stopping me. He leaned forward, his voice dangerously quiet. "It looks alive, Leo. Something your own soulless skyscrapers have never managed. The calculations are sound. The risk is managed. This is the design. Your only job is to find the money for it. Or we take it to a firm that appreciates vision over spreadsheet cells." The threat hung in the air. The Viridian Tower was Kalus's brainchild. Without him, it was just another building. Apex needed his name attached far more than he needed their money. Leo was backed into a corner and he knew it. His eyes flickered to me and I saw the realization dawn in them. I was no longer just an employee. I was Alex's ally. His confidant. The trust between us was palpable, and it infuriated him more than any design could. After the meeting, as we walked back to the car, the tension was thick. Alex was silent, brooding. "He's going to look for a way to sink this," I said. "He can try," Alex replied, his jaw tight. "But he's not just fighting me anymore. He's fighting you. And I have a feeling that's a war he's uniquely unprepared for." He opened the car door for me, a simple old-fashioned gesture that felt strangely intimate after the corporate battlefield we'd just left. "He was a fool," Alex said suddenly, his voice low. "To have you and see you only as a friend." He looked at a diamond and complained it wasn't a useful piece of coal. The words settled over me, warm and unsettling. This was no longer just about revenge. Something was shifting, changing shape between us as organically and inevitably as the design of our tower. The line between our strategic alliance and something real was beginning to blur, and I was no longer sure which side I wanted to be on. The city was in the grip of an unseasonably warm autumn, the air thick and golden. The success of the Viridian Tower project, now fully embracing our radical designs, had become the talk of the industry. Magazines ran features on Alex, the reclusive genius, and increasingly on me, the new visionary at Kalis Designs. I was no longer Leo's ex. I was Alara Vance, a name to be reckoned with in my own right. The attention was gratifying, but it also acted as a magnifying glass, intensifying the pressure. And the focus of that pressure was the upcoming annual Apex Ventures Gala. It was the social event of the season for the finance and architecture worlds, a glittering den of networking and subtle power plays. Attendance was mandatory. The thought of going made my skin crawl. It was in that same opulent ballroom a year ago that Leo had introduced me as his friend. The memory was a ghost that still had the power to haunt me. "I'm not going," I announced to Alex one evening in the loft. "I'll have a migraine. A highly contagious one." He was studying a structural stress diagram, but he looked up, one eyebrow arched. "Running away? It's not running. It's strategic avoidance." "Bullshit," he said, setting down his pen. You're going to walk in on my arm wearing something that costs more than Leo's car, and you're going to watch him sweat. It's the final stage of your master plan, isn't it? The triumphant return." He was right, of course. But the plan felt different now. It felt less like a triumphant victory march and more like walking back into a nightmare I'd only just escaped. "I don't have anything to wear," I muttered, a weak last-ditch protest. A slow, mischievous smile spread across Alex's face. "Leave that to me." The night of the gala, a sleek black car picked me up. When it stopped not at the event venue, but outside the atelier of Isabella Conti, a legendary fashion designer known for her architectural, fiercely feminine gowns, my heart began to hammer. An assistant whisked me inside where a single dress waited for me. It was a masterpiece. A deep, sapphire blue velvet that felt like liquid night, cut with a precision that echoed the lines of our best skyscrapers. It was backless, daring, and held up by a delicate, almost structural silver collar. It was power and poetry woven into fabric. When I emerged, Alex was waiting in the showroom. He had foregone his usual uniform of t-shirt and jeans for a perfectly tailored black tuxedo. The transformation was staggering. He looked less like a reclusive artist and more like a king of some shadowy, sophisticated empire. His eyes traveled over me, and for a moment, the usual sharp assessment in his gaze was replaced by something raw and appreciative. Something that made the air leave my lungs. "It'll do," he said, his voice slightly husky. "It'll do." I laughed, nervous energy coursing through me. He offered me his arm. "Let's go make your ex-boyfriend regret every life choice he's ever made." Walking into the gala on Alex Kalis's arm was a surreal experience. The sea of black ties and glittering gowns parted for us. Whispers followed in our wake. I saw heads turn, eyes widen in recognition. I was no longer a ghost. I was a spectacle. And then I saw Leo. He was standing with a group of partners, a flute of champagne in his hand. He was laughing, the picture of success. Then his eyes found us. The laugh died on his lips. His face went through a rapid series of emotions. Shock, confusion, a flash of anger, and finally, a dawning, sickening realization of the magnitude of his error. He wasn't just looking at his rival and a former employee. He was looking at a united front, a power couple whose synergy was palpable from across the room. The evening became a delicate dance. Alex never left my side, his hand a constant, possessive presence on the small of my back. We circulated, we charmed, we held court. I spoke confidently about the tower, about our vision, and every word was a nail in the coffin of Leo's perception of me. During a slow song, Alex led me onto the dance floor. It was the first time we'd been so close without a blueprint between us. His hand was warm and firm on my back, his other hand holding mine with a surprising gentleness. "You're enjoying this a little too much," I murmured, my cheek close to his shoulder. "I'm a man who appreciates a well-executed plan," he replied, his voice a low rumble near my ear. "And you, Alara Vance, are a masterpiece of execution." He spun me gently, and the world blurred into a kaleidoscope of light and sound. In that moment, surrounded by the ghosts of my past humiliation, held by the man who had become my most unlikely ally, I felt something break and reform inside me. The desire for revenge, which had sustained me for so long, finally melted away, replaced by something brighter, more potent. A sense of self, a victory, and of a terrifying, thrilling attraction to the complicated man whose heart I could feel beating a steady, strong rhythm against my own. As the song ended, Leo appeared beside us, his expression a mask of strained civility. Elara. Alex. A word, he said, his voice tight. We followed him to a quieter balcony overlooking the city. The same city our tower would soon pierce. This has gone far enough, Leo began, his composure cracking. Elara, this charade. Working with him? Parading around with him? What are you trying to prove? Before I could answer, Alex did. He slid his arm around my waist, pulling me firmly against his side. I don't believe introductions are necessary, Leo, Alex said, his tone deceptively light. But since you seem confused, let me clarify. This is Elara, my lead designer, my partner, and my girlfriend. The word hung in the night air, explosive and definitive. Girlfriend. Leo looked like he'd been gut-punched. He stared at me, his eyes pleading, demanding I deny it. I looked from his panicked, desperate face to Alex's calm, possessive one. I felt the solid strength of Alex's arm around me, a shelter and a claim. This was the moment of my sweetest revenge, served not by my own hand, but by the man who had seen my value when Leo had thrown it away. I turned to Leo, my smile serene, my heart finally completely free. It's true, I said softly. All of it. The panic in Leo's eyes was complete. He had introduced me as his friend. And in doing so, he had created his biggest rival's greatest asset. He had lost me, and in the most public, humiliating way possible, he had handed me to the one man he could never hope to compete with. He stared at us for one more horrified second, then turned and walked away, a defeated man in a room full of winners. Alex and I were left alone on the balcony, the city sprawled at our feet. He didn't let me go. You didn't have to say that, I said quietly, looking up at him. The girlfriend part. I know, he replied, his gray eyes searching mine in the dim light. But was it a lie? The world held its breath. The revenge was complete. The second love was just beginning to whisper its name. The silence on the balcony after Leo's retreat was louder than any music from the gala. The cool night air was a shock against my skin, which still hummed with the residual energy of the confrontation. Alex's arm remained around my waist, a solid, warm band that felt both like an anchor and the only thing keeping me from floating away. You didn't have to say that, I had whispered. The girlfriend part. His response, I know. But was it a lie? Hung between us, a question more daunting than any structural engineering problem we'd ever faced. I looked up at him. The sharp planes of his face were softened by the city's ambient glow, but his eyes were as intense as ever, watching me, waiting. In them I saw none of Leo's calculation or possessiveness. I saw a challenge and a profound, unsettling honesty. I don't know, I answered, my own voice just as honest. As I didn't. The lines had been so deliberately blurred. Was I his girlfriend? Or was I his partner in a beautifully executed act of corporate and personal warfare? The distinction had ceased to matter until he'd voiced it, making it real. A slow smile touched his lips, not triumphant but understanding. Then we'll call it a provisional designation. Subject to review. He finally released me, but the ghost of his touch remained. We didn't go back to the party. He simply took my hand, his fingers lacing through mine with a natural ease that stole my breath, and led me out of the ballroom, through the lobby and into the waiting car. We didn't speak on the ride back to the loft. The silence was comfortable, charged with a new, unspoken agreement. The next morning everything was different, and yet, everything was the same. We were back at the loft, surrounded by the familiar chaos of our project. But the air between us had shifted. The professional barrier had been permanently breached. When our hands brushed while reaching for the same blueprint, it wasn't an accident. It was a spark. When he leaned over my shoulder to point out a detail, the heat of his body was a conscious presence. The world, however, had taken note. The society pages, of course, ran with the story. Kalis's new muse. And from friend to rival's romance. The Vance saga. The professional journals were more circumspect, but the narrative was set. The brilliant, tempestuous Alexander Kalis and his rising star partner were an item. Our professional credibility was now inextricably linked with our personal rumor. It should have been a disaster. Instead, it felt like a superpower. Our shared vision for the Viridian Tower became even more potent. In meetings we communicated with a glance, a finished sentence. The trust we had built over months of late nights and shared battles deepened into an unshakable synergy. We were a unit and the industry watched us with a mixture of awe and envy. Leo predictably became impossible. His professional objections to our designs became more petty, more personal. He was a cornered animal lashing out. He tried to go over Alex's head to the silent financial partners, he nitpicked budgets, he delayed approvals. But his panic was his undoing. It made him look weak, unstable. The very unprofessionalism he had once accused me of was now his defining trait. One afternoon he stormed into the loft, bypassing Anya completely. He found Alex and me at the central table, working on the landscaping concepts for the tower's sky park. "We need to talk. Alone," he said, his eyes boring into me. "Anything you have to say to Alara, you can say in front of me," Alex said, not even looking up from the schematic. "This is about the project," Leo snapped, though his trembling hands betrayed him. "Your residential modules are blowing the budget on these glorified flower boxes. It's a ridiculous extravagance." I stood, my calm a stark contrast to his agitation. "The glorified flower boxes, Leo, are integrated aeroponic systems that will provide fresh produce for the residents and filter the building's air. They reduce long-term operational costs and are a key selling point. The numbers are in the report you approved last week." He blinked, thrown. He hadn't done his homework. He was running on emotion. "I don't care about the report. This whole project is spiraling because of you. Because because she's what, Leo?" Alex finally looked up, his voice dangerously quiet. "Better than you. Smarter than you. Because she took the heart you discarded and used it to build an empire at my side." Leo flinched as if struck. The truth of the statement was a physical blow. He looked at me and I saw the full, devastating panorama of his regret. He hadn't just lost a girlfriend. He had lost a partner who could have helped him build his own empire. He had traded a diamond for a piece of coal, and now he had to watch that diamond shine in the crown of his greatest rival. "You'll regret this, Alara," he whispered, the threat empty and pathetic. "He'll use you up and throw you away. He doesn't know how to love anything but his buildings." He turned and left, the echo of his defeat trailing behind him. The loft was silent once more. I felt a strange pang of pity, quickly followed by a wave of finality. That chapter was closed. Truly, irrevocably closed. I felt Alex's presence behind me. He didn't touch me, just stood there, a solid, silent support. "He's wrong, you know," he said, his voice low. "I do know how to love something more than my buildings." My breath hitched. I turned to face him. The raw, unguarded look in his eyes was more terrifying and more beautiful than any skyscraper. "Oh," I managed, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I'm looking at her." And in that moment, in the quiet aftermath of the battle, surrounded by the blueprints of our shared dream, the provisional designation became permanent. The revenge was complete. The second love had found its voice. The confession hung in the air between us, as monumental and fragile as a soap bubble. "I'm looking at her." The words were simple, but the meaning behind them was a seismic event, reshaping the landscape of my world. I didn't know what to say. A witty retort died on my lips. A nervous deflection felt like a betrayal. So I just stood there looking at him, this man who had been my savior, my tormentor, my partner, and was now offering me his heart with a terrifying, stark honesty. "Alex," I began, my voice a whisper. He took a step closer, his gaze unwavering. "You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know. The girlfriend title wasn't just for Leo's benefit. It was a hope." The distance between us vanished. He didn't kiss me. He simply reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear, his fingertips brushing my cheek. The touch was electric, a jolt that went straight to my core. It was more intimate than any kiss I'd ever shared with Leo. It was a question and an answer all at once. "This is complicated," I finally managed to say, my mind reeling. "We work together. The project, the Viridian Tower." "The tower is stone and glass," he said, his voice low and intense. "This is us. And we are the foundation of everything we build. Without this," he gestured between the two of us, "the tower is just a building. With it, it's a testament." How could I argue with that? He was right. Our professional partnership had flourished precisely because of the deep, unspoken connection that had been growing between us. To deny the personal now would be to build our dream on a lie. I took his hand, lacing my fingers through his. His grip was firm, sure. Then it's not complicated, I said, my own certainty surprising me. It's the simplest thing in the world. The smile that broke across his face was unlike any I had ever seen from him. It was pure, unguarded joy, and it transformed him completely. It was the sunrise after a long, dark night. He leaned in then, and finally his lips met mine. It wasn't a gentle, exploratory kiss. It was a claiming, a confirmation, a culmination. It was the meeting of two fierce, stubborn spirits who had finally found their match. It tasted of coffee, ambition, and a future I had never dared to imagine. Our relationship, now out in the open between us, added a new, profound layer to our work. The late nights at the loft became less about escaping and more about building a life, piece by piece, between the blueprints. We'd argue about load-bearing walls with the same passion we'd argue about what to order for dinner. He'd fall asleep on the couch with his head in my lap, a schematic crumpled in his hand, and I'd feel a surge of protective tenderness so strong it almost hurt. We were careful at work, maintaining a professional decorum, but the energy had changed. The team sensed it, and instead of creating tension, it fostered a new sense of family. We were all in this together, building something legendary, led by two people who were quite obviously and desperately in love. The Viridian Tower began to rise from the ground, a physical manifestation of our shared vision. Every time we visited the site, hard hats on, watching the steel skeleton climb towards the sky, it felt like we were watching our own love story being written in iron and concrete. It was ours. Months drifted by in a blissful, focused haze. The memory of Leo and my quest for revenge faded into a distant, almost forgotten prologue. This was the main story. One evening we were at my apartment, a rare night off. I was cooking and Alex was supposedly helping, but was mostly just distracting me, his arms wrapped around my waist, his chin resting on my shoulder. "You know," he murmured, his lips against my neck, "I've been thinking." "A dangerous pastime," I teased, stirring the pasta sauce. "About foundations," he said, his tone shifting, becoming more serious. He released me and turned me around to face him. His expression was thoughtful, intense. "The tower's foundation is set. It's deep. It's unshakable. It will last for centuries." "I should hope so," I said, smiling, but my heart began to beat a little faster. There was something in his eyes. "I want a foundation like that," he said, his gray eyes holding mine captive. "Not for a building. For a life. Our life." He reached into the pocket of his jeans, the same worn, plaster-dusted jeans he'd been in when I first met him, and pulled out a small black velvet box. My breath caught in my throat. The world narrowed to this moment, to this man, to the box in his hand. "Ilara," he said, his voice steady and sure, echoing in the quiet of my kitchen. "You were the most brilliant, unexpected addition to my life. You saw the soul of my work and you showed me I had one of my own. You are my partner in every sense of the word. Build a life with me. Marry me." He opened the box. Nestled inside wasn't a large, traditional diamond, but a stunning, pear-cut sapphire, the exact color of the dress I'd worn to the gala, set in a band of twisted, architectural platinum. It was unique. It was perfect. It was so utterly us. Tears welled in my eyes, not of sadness or of past hurt, but of a joy so profound it had no other outlet. I looked from the ring to his face, to the love and the unwavering certainty shining in his eyes. This was it. This was the second chance I hadn't known I was waiting for. This was the love that had been built not on fleeting passion, but on respect, shared ambition, and a deep, abiding understanding of each other's souls. "Yes," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Alex. 1,000 times yes." He slid the ring onto my finger, a perfect fit. It felt not like a piece of jewelry but like a promise, a cornerstone. Then he kissed me, and in that kiss, I felt the solid, unshakable foundation of the rest of our lives lock into place. The rival was gone. The wife had arrived. The sapphire on my finger was a constant, cool weight, a tangible reminder that my life had been completely upended and reassembled into something more beautiful than I could have ever designed myself. I was no longer Ilara Vance, the scorned woman. I was Ilara Vance, the visionary architect, the beloved partner, the fiancé. The news of our engagement sent ripples through our world. The professional journals reported it with a kind of awe, as if it were the inevitable culmination of a great artistic partnership. Our team at the loft celebrated with champagne and a truly monstrous cake shaped like the Viridian Tower. The joy was genuine and infectious. There was, of course, one person we had to inform in a more formal capacity. The final piece of the puzzle. We requested a meeting with Leo at the Apex Ventures offices. It was a power move and we both knew it. We were entering his territory, but we were now the undisputed royalty. He was waiting for us in the same conference room where, months before, he had stared at me in shock as I presented my first designs. He looked older, the lines on his face deeper, the confident gloss he'd always worn now noticeably dulled. He stood as we entered, his eyes immediately dropping to my left hand, where the sapphire sparkled under the fluorescent lights. He flinched as if struck by a physical blow. "Leo," Alex said, his tone civil but devoid of warmth. He pulled out a chair for me before taking his own, the gesture a silent declaration of our unity. "Alex." "Alara," Leo said, his voice strained. He remained standing, gripping the back of his chair. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "We're here as a courtesy," Alex began, leaning back in his chair, the picture of relaxed authority. "With the tower's construction ahead of schedule and the final financials locked in, our direct involvement with Apex will be scaling back. The project is in capable hands." Leo's jaw tightened. He was being managed and he knew it. "I see. And," I added, my voice calm and clear, "we wanted to share some personal news with you, given our history." I lifted my hand slightly, letting the ring catch the light. "Alex and I are engaged." The silence that followed was profound. Leo's face went through a rapid, painful series of contortions. Shock, a fresh wave of humiliation, and finally, a bleak, utter defeat. He had lost. Completely and totally. The woman he had introduced as his friend was not only the driving force behind his firm's most prestigious project but was now going to be the wife of the man he considered his greatest rival. He had been outmaneuvered on every possible front. He sank slowly into his chair, the fight gone out of him. Congratulations," he muttered, the words seeming to cost him a great effort. "Thank you," I said. And I meant it. There was no more anger, no more schadenfreude. Looking at him now, I felt only a distant pity. He was a cautionary tale, a man who had valued the wrong things and had lost everything of real value because of it. "The project, it's a masterpiece," he said almost to himself. He looked at me and for the first time, there was no resentment in his gaze, only a weary acknowledgement. "You were always this capable, weren't you? I didn't want to see it. It was easier to have you beside me than standing as my equal." It was the closest I would ever get to an apology. The closest he would ever come to understanding the depth of his error. "Yes," I said simply. "I was." We left him there, sitting alone in the conference room, a king dethroned in his own castle. As the door closed behind us, I felt Alex's hand find mine, his fingers intertwining with mine, the sapphire a hard, beautiful point of pressure. "It's over," I breathed, the final ghost of that humiliating night laid to rest. "No," Alex corrected gently, pulling me to a stop in the sleek, empty hallway. He cupped my face in his hands, his thumbs stroking my cheeks. "That is over. Our story is just beginning." The wedding was a small, private affair, held at the base of the still-rising Viridian Tower. It wasn't in a church or a ballroom, but amidst the raw, unfinished promise of our greatest shared dream. Our guests were our team, our true friends, the people who had built this with us. I wore a simple ivory silk sheath and Alex wore a new, dark suit, the plaster dust finally banished for the day. We wrote our own vows. His were a testament to finding a missing part of his own soul. Mine were a promise to always stand as his equal, to build a life as bold and beautiful as the structures we created together. As the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, Alex kissed me, and a cheer went up from our gathered friends, echoing against the steel and concrete around us. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated joy, a cornerstone being set not just in our marriage, but in the very legacy of the building that watched over us. Later, as we stood together, looking up at the skeletal tower clawing at the sky, his arm was around me, my head on his shoulder. "You know," I said, "he introduced me as his friend, and it was the worst moment of my life. But it was also the best thing that ever happened to me. It led me here. To us." Alex looked down at me, his gray eyes soft in the twilight. "Then I suppose we owe him a debt of gratitude." "I suppose we do," I laughed, the sound light and free. "He was my rival, my partner, my husband." He was the man who had seen the fire in me when others had only seen a placid smile. And I was his wife, not a friend, not a rival, but his equal, his love, the cornerstone of his world, just as he was of mine. The panic was his. The future was ours. And it was more brilliant than anything we could have ever designed on paper. The end.